Good day, students. I'm again with you. Today we are going to speak about the trends in the development of translation theory as a study. Translation theory has a long and rich history, which had various approaches by different scientists. For example, some group of scientists divided it into 4 periods. The periodical development of translation theory as a study. It was divided into 4 periods. The first one was the beginnings of the 19th century, that it was studied about from the 4th BC up to the 19th century, where Cicero's principle, just word over translation, that was against of word over translation, and all the translators followed after him as he was against of word over translation. This approach was welcomed. The next period was the beginning of the 19th century, mid-50s of the 20th century. In this very period, a lot of scientists such as Paul Valery, Ezra Pound, Benedict Gross, Matthew Arnold and others, Walter Benjamin and many others have got their own ideas or their own approach to this translation studies, and they developed with their own point of view this study. The next step was mid-50s and early 60s. This period, the first paper on the machine translation calculates at the close of the 40th century, and a lot of scholars applied the linguistic theory and statistics, information theory to translation, and they made a great development in this very study. The next period was the early 60s and the late 70s, and here also a lot of argument between universalists and relativists positions was brought back to the foreground, and there was a lot of dispute concerning to the difficult approach to translation studies, and it was drawn up to linguistics as a field of psychology, anthropology, sociology, ethno and social linguistics, and so on. And during this period, a lot of disagreements occurred between scientists, but still, at the end of these periods, a new approach to the translation were established by modern translation science under the influence of several decisive factors of theoretical point of views. And on the screen you can see some very important approaches to the modern translation after this 4 period, and a lot of approaches were given by different scientists such as Baranov, Maslova, Stepanov, Framkina, and Apesian, and so on. And new conceptions in linguistic studies have naturally brought about changes in views of translation, which found their reflection in the following basic ideas. As they say, translation, it's not only bilingual process of communication, it is also process of bicultural intercourse, and so on. Mention should be made of the latest work of translation written along these by Holmes, Lotman, Thorpe, Turi, Caroline, and Nestava, and so on. A lot of works were done by them according to the theory of translation. There were a lot of arguments on the theory of translation, and still disputes just haven't been stopped yet. When we speak about the next slide, we have to mention about the importance of the next step of concern to the scientists' ideas about the translation. We have to mention about Komissarov's, the Nilubin's, Huhuni's approach, Vinograd's approach to the translation theory concerning to the linguistic and the mechanical translation. And they after them they left a lot of books concerning to science of translation, as you see on the screen, a lot of theoretical books on this very aspect. On the screen you can see the Russian scientists that made a great contribution to the field of theory of translation. As we can see the names of Chukovsky, Gorky, and other Fyodorov, and other scientists that made a great contribution to the field of translation. History of translation bears out that the scholars abroad also debated a lot whether translation is an art or science. This kind of approach were done by Nida, Tabor, and Atkins, and so on. There were a lot of arguments between the scientists about the science or art of translation. So linguistic approach to translation led to the creation in the mid-50s of the 20th century of the linguistic theory of translation, which investigates various issues of phenomenology and process of translation between languages with the principles emphasized on the modern translation. A lot of scientists whose names you see on the screen point out their book several major reasons that the importance of theory of translation and just during the studies of university levels, and that's why they include this kind of theory during the educational system. Rapid growth of science and technology in different parts of the world brought about the information explosion, which resulted in a sort of translation boom, and there was a great demand for translators in different kind of spheres, military force, technical, diplomatic translators, and so on. There was a great demand for translation after this period. And for this reason, generation of translators and interpreters had to be trained and that were capable of handling different types of text and successfully coping with the new translation challenges, because demand was increasing, and that's why the training of the translators also just became various. So machine translation is defined as a term used to describe translation performed by a computer software program rather than by human translator, which is known as human translation. At the time machine translation appears and the new approach just came, we just was born to the theory of translation. But they couldn't rely on machine translation at all because it needed a lot of editing by human being, and that's why at the time some of them refused machine translation. But still machine translation was approved by some scientists because it was time saving, and the editing could be done by human being after some saving the time, and that's why it was supported by just a lot of scientists. Up to date, the machine translation or CET developed. It was a new approach to the translation theory, and it is still studied just at the universities of world universities. And it was all about the translation studies as a study. Thank you very much.